I'm here with Margaret Anadu, who is a senior partner at Vistria Group. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are at the Milken Institute Global Conference. Less people think we are just hanging out in the lobby of a random hotel here. Tell me about your mission at Vistria Group, real estate, broad portfolio. What are you doing there?
Awesome. So my mission at the Vistria Group, which has actually been my mission for almost 2 decades now, is to use private capital to generate very strong returns.
Yeah.
You know, that is what we're about, but also do it in a way that really impacts people's lives. And so a lot of my career and what I'll be doing at Vistria as well, at least to start, is investing in housing. And, you know, not just housing for the richest Americans and Class A luxury housing, or, you know, the poorest Americans and deeply affordable, but really that broader segment of affordable and workforce housing, which most Americans in the U.S. live in today.
Well, you know, you're in New York City. Yep. I am too. That is a place that has a dearth of that middle housing, and so the shortage of housing stock intrigues me. It's what do you attribute this? Because it's not necessarily the economy.
It's not a singular issue. So it's a few issues. So one of them, and this is the piece that I focus a lot on, given my role, is just a lack of capital. So to invest in housing stock, affordable workforce, and really both produce more units, preserve what we have, improve the condition of what we have, it requires a lot of capital. Real estate's a very capital-intensive space. And it's one where investors broadly have shied away. People love to invest in shiny new luxury, multifamily and gateway cities in the Sun Belt. And that is where, if you believe it, since the global financial crisis, almost 80% of our capital has flown to really house the top 10% of Americans. And so there hasn't been the attention, the capital, the investing in this housing stock for the rest of Americans. So there's that. And then two, another issue, and this one I think is an even stickier problem, is the cost to produce housing that is affordable to your teacher and your bus driver and your grocery store worker.
Labor cost plus material cost.
It doesn't add up between the labor, the cost, the soft costs, the NIMBYism, and the time that takes to get through entitlements.
For those who don't know, basically, not in my backyard. Do not build that massive apartment.
And I think everyone knows time is money. And so to get a new building built, sometimes you can spend a year, 2 years, just going through all the steps to get a community comfortable. And so when you add that up, you basically, you need the public sector. So on private sector costs, private sector cost of capital, we can't really build new housing that is affordable for most Americans without government involvement, without that public-private partnership subsidy, whether that's through tax abatements, subsidy, revenue contracts. And so it has to be a partnership.
And we've seen that partnership, we've seen it happening.
More and more.
And it's 3 levels as well. Obviously, municipal, you've got the state, you've got the federal. Talk about the current environment. One of the things, the regional banking crisis, and I'm struck that community banks have been so important, certainly on the commercial real estate front for small businesses. Is it as important, when you look at what's happening with residential housing?
It is. So there are 2 pieces of it that I find really important. One, and you love that old cliche, real estate's really local. And so some of these community banks and either regional banks, when they invest in their markets, they do just have a different knowledge about the neighborhoods, the needs at a very granular level, sometimes block to block. And so when you pull capital out of those intermediaries, those banks, you lose some of that dollars that comes with the real knowledge. And then the second piece is just scale. So we focus a lot on the big banks, Chase, Bank of America, like these institutions, which are a huge part of commercial real estate lending.
We now call them.
And I pray that they don't. But we also, I think, sometimes forget that the majority of commercial real estate lending in the U.S., it actually is the banks that are $250 billion and below. So they're out there doing the loans for the multifamily building, the grocery store, the offices, et cetera. And so as we lose those banks, we've lost a few in the last few weeks, that does take some of that capital out of the market, and that's concerning.
So if I were to hand you a wand and you're standing in Washington, let's take even the Fed, so many of the factors that have brought us to where we are right now. From a policy perspective, what's actually going to move the needle?
So some of it is just more. I mean, there are incredible federal tools. There's the low-income housing tax credit, which builds a lot of new affordable housing. You have Section 8, which is a very old program, which provides a subsidy for low-income Americans to really cover that delta between what they can afford and what the market rent is in their neighborhood. And so those programs have both produced and preserved many units around the country. It's just not enough. So some of this literally is about more of what we know works. But I do think, and I don't want to go too long on this, but the partnership between those federal programs and what we have at the state and local level is crucial. And in some cities, we have great partnerships. In some places, we don't have partnerships at all.
Is it very red state, blue state when you look at the division?
You know, there's some outliers. I think sometimes it does fall along those lines, but I'll give a great example, which may surprise some folks. Florida actually just back in, I think it was the end of March, passed an incredibly large affordable housing bill. It's close to $800 million. It was creative in its approach. And so you might think, well, I'm not going to expect that out of Florida, but I was actually pretty excited about the legislation.